Hello everyone, have a great day. Today,
I'll continue the story of Jack and single life.
follow more heartwarming love stories.
The meeting room on the top floor of the company was unusually quiet. Normally, this floor was the calmest place in the entire building, far from the noise of employees and daily operations. Only executives and family members of the company were allowed here. But tonight, the air felt heavy, like something important was about to break. Jack stood near the large glass window, his hands resting lightly in his pockets as he stared at the city lights below. Behind him, his mother sat calmly at the long conference table. Her posture was elegant as always, controlled, unshakable. But the conversation between them had already begun to turn cold. "You've been distracted lately," she said. Her tone was soft but sharp. Jack didn't turn around. "I've been working." His mother gave a faint smile. "Don't lie to me." Jack slowly turned. "I'm not lying." But the older woman's eyes were already studying him carefully. "You've been spending a lot of time with that woman." The room grew silent. Jack didn't respond immediately, and that silence was already enough. Downstairs, Single Life stepped out of the elevator quietly. She had come to bring Jack the documents he had forgotten in the apartment. The security guard recognized her and allowed her upstairs. "Mr. Jack is in the executive meeting room," the guard said. Single Life nodded politely. "Thank you." She walked down the quiet hallway slowly, but when she reached the door of the meeting room, she heard voices inside, Jack's voice, and another one she recognized immediately, his mother. Single Life stopped. She didn't mean to listen, but the moment she heard her name, her feet froze. Inside the room, the conversation continued. Jack's mother folded her hands calmly on the table. "I warned you about this." Jack's voice hardened slightly. "She's not a problem." The older woman tilted her head. "Of course she is." Jack stepped closer to the table. "You don't even know her." His mother's expression didn't change. "I don't need to." Her voice grew colder. "She's a single mother. She comes from nothing. And suddenly she's living near you." Jack's jaw tightened. "That doesn't mean anything." His mother's eyes sharpened. "It means everything." Outside the door, Single Life felt her heart pounding. Every word felt heavier than the last. She had always known Jack's family wouldn't accept her, but hearing it like this was different. It felt like standing outside a world she was never meant to enter. Inside the meeting room, Jack's mother stood up slowly. She walked toward him. "Jack," she said quietly, "you are the heir to this family." Her hand gestured toward the city outside the window. "This company, this empire. You can't throw that away for a woman like her." The sentence hit the air like ice. Jack's eyes darkened, and for the first time in years, his patience snapped. "You don't get to talk about her like that." The words were low, but firm. His mother stopped walking, because something in his voice had changed. Jack had never spoken to her like this before. "Excuse me?" she said calmly. Jack didn't step back. "You heard me." The silence between them grew sharp. "Single Life is not what you think she is." His mother's eyes narrowed slightly. "And what exactly do you think she is?" Jack answered without hesitation. "Someone I care about." The room froze, because that sentence was the first time Jack had openly admitted it. Outside the door, Single Life felt her breath catch. She had never heard him say those words out loud before, and suddenly, everything felt more dangerous. Inside, Jack's mother let out a quiet laugh, not amused, just disappointed. "So that's what this is." She walked slowly back to the table. "You've fallen in love with her." Jack didn't deny it, and that silence confirmed everything. The older woman's expression hardened. "Then we'll solve this quickly." Jack frowned. "What does that mean?" His mother calmly picked up her phone. "There are ways to remove problems." Jack's voice turned cold. "She's not a problem." But his mother ignored him. Instead, she said something that made the air in the room suddenly colder. "I've already spoken to the board." Jack's eyes narrowed. "About what?" The older woman placed the phone down. "About transferring you overseas." The words hit him instantly. A new branch in Europe. 3 years. No distractions. Jack stared at her. You're serious? His mother nodded calmly. And the woman? Jack asked. Her lips curved slightly. She will disappear from your life. Outside the door, Single Life felt her heart stop, because suddenly, she understood something terrifying. This conversation had never been about convincing Jack. It had always been about removing her. Inside the room, Jack's voice rose for the first time. You're not sending me anywhere. His mother looked at him steadily. I don't need your permission. Jack slammed his hand lightly on the table. For the first time in my life, I'm telling you no. The words echoed in the room. Jack had never defied her before. Not once. And now, everything between them had changed. Outside the door, Single Life slowly stepped back. Her hands trembled slightly, because the truth had finally become clear. Jack's family would never allow her to stay in his life, no matter what he said, no matter what he wanted. And suddenly, she realized something painful. If she stayed, Jack might lose everything. Inside the room, Jack's mother spoke one last sentence. Cold. Final. If you refuse the transfer, her eyes hardened, then we'll deal with the woman ourselves. Outside the door, Single Life's eyes filled with tears, because she finally understood. The battle between Jack and his family had just begun, and she was the reason for it. The hallway outside the meeting room felt suddenly colder. Single Life stood there, her heart beating so loudly she was afraid someone inside the room might hear it. She never meant to listen, but now she had heard too much. Her fingers tightened around the folder she was holding. Inside the meeting room, Jack's voice was still tense. You can't control my life forever. His mother remained calm, sitting at the long table as if nothing unusual had happened. I don't need to control your life, she replied. I only need to protect this family. Jack shook his head. By destroying mine? The words hung heavily in the room, but his mother didn't react the way he expected. Instead, she sighed softly. You're young, she said. You think this is love. Jack's voice lowered. I know it is. The older woman watched him quietly for a moment. Then she said something that made the atmosphere even colder. Love fades. Reputation doesn't. Outside the door, Single Life slowly stepped backward. Her chest felt tight. Every sentence she heard made the distance between her and Jack clearer. Inside the room, Jack's mother continued speaking. You are responsible for more than your feelings. Her gaze moved toward the city outside the window. This company feeds thousands of families. Every decision you make affects more than just you. Jack's voice remained firm. And what about what I want? His mother finally stood up. What you want, she said quietly, is temporary. At that moment, another voice entered the conversation. The door of the meeting room opened from the opposite side. Jack's uncle stepped inside, a tall man with gray hair and a serious expression. Am I interrupting? He asked. Jack frowned. What are you doing here? His mother answered calmly. I asked him to come. Jack immediately understood. This wasn't just a conversation anymore. This was a decision being made without him. Outside the door, Single Life froze again. She hadn't left yet, because the moment Jack's uncle spoke, the tone of the conversation changed. More serious, more dangerous. Jack's uncle sat down at the table. We've already discussed the situation with the board, he said. Jack's eyes narrowed. What situation? His uncle glanced briefly at Jack's mother. Then he answered directly. The woman. Jack's jaw tightened. Her name is Single Life. His uncle ignored the correction. She's a risk. Jack's voice hardened. She's not a business deal. No, his uncle replied calmly. She's a scandal waiting to happen. Outside the door, Single Life felt the words like a knife. Scandal. That was how they saw her. Not a person. Not someone Jack cared about. Just a problem to remove. Inside the room, Jack's uncle opened a thin folder. We've already prepared several options. Jack stared at him. What options? His mother answered instead. Solutions. Jack crossed his arms. I'm listening. His uncle spoke first. Option 1. You accept the transfer to Europe. Jack didn't move. And if I don't? His mother's voice remained calm. Then we move to option 2. Jack's expression darkened. What's option 2? His uncle closed the folder slowly. We convince the woman to leave. Jack laughed once, but there was no humor in it. You think she'll just disappear because you ask? His mother's eyes grew colder. Not ask. The word lingered in the air. Persuade. Outside the door, Single Life's breath caught. She already knew what that word meant in their world. Money, pressure, threats, whatever it took. Inside the room, Jack shook his head. You're not going near her. His mother tilted her head slightly. You can't stop us. Jack's voice dropped dangerously low. Watch me. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Jack's uncle said quietly, You're risking everything. Jack didn't hesitate. She's worth it. The sentence filled the room with silence, because no one in the family had ever heard Jack say something like that before. Outside the door, Single Life closed her eyes. Those words should have made her happy, but instead, they hurt. Because she now understood what Jack was risking. His family, his future, his company, all because of her. Inside the room, Jack's mother spoke again. You think this is noble? Jack said nothing. But in the end, she continued calmly, you will lose her anyway. Jack looked directly at her. Why? Her answer was simple. Because she will leave before you ruin your life. Outside the door, Single Life felt her tears finally fall. Because the woman inside the room was right about one thing. She already knew what she had to do. Single Life quietly placed the folder she brought on a small table near the wall. Jack would find it later. Then she turned and walked slowly down the hallway. Each step felt heavier than the last. Inside the meeting room, Jack was still arguing with his family, unaware that the person he was fighting for had just heard everything. As Single Life reached the elevator, she wiped the tears from her face. Her reflection in the metal doors looked calm again, almost expressionless. The elevator arrived with a soft sound. She stepped inside. As the doors slowly closed, she whispered one sentence to herself. If I stay, he loses everything. The elevator doors shut, taking her away from the floor, away from the argument, away from Jack, and toward a decision that might break both of their hearts.